Hi, I'm Kadeen Eccleston, and my section is on historical and socio-political background of Native Americans. In my section, I'm going to talk about the Native American history, their early history, and this range from the Ice Age. I'm also going to talk about the Native Americans and the Europeans. And breakdown of this section will be the laws and acts, legislator, depth of lands, and the trails of tears. All right, first about the early history. Estimates range from about 10 to 90 million Native American inhabited America at the time of European arrivals. So prior to the Europeans coming to America, there were already Native Americans here in America. It is believed that during the Ice Age, they had traveled a land bridge across the Bear from Siberia, into what is now known as Alaska. So they were here well before the Europeans. Um, as they were here, they became fishermen, hunters. They farmed crops, corns. They built homes, and whatever resources that's available for their territory provided. Some of these included animal skins, sun-dried brick, or lumber for long houses, depending on the region. So as you can see, these Native Americans were very resourceful. They came here and they started just building stuff, fishing, getting used to the land. Um, then mistaking the place where he landed. Now, Native Americans and the Europeans mistaking the place where he landed, San Salvador in the Bahamas, for the Indies. Columbus called the Native Americans Indians, and this is where they got their name from, which is Indians. Um, Columbus thought that he was in the Indies somewhere, as opposed to being in America when he first came here, and he saw these Native Americans, and so of course he did call them the Indians. Um, Even though they came here while the Native Americans were here and Europeans, the Native Americans actually welcomed them. These Europeans, they welcomed them with open heart because they were that kind of people. They're very nice people. They're very decent people. So they actually welcomed these Europeans with open arms. They welcomed them. They taught them how to survive on in America, because if it wasn't for the Native Americans, the Europeans wouldn't be able to survive in this new land. They taught them how to fish. They taught them how to crop corns. And nowadays, as we can see, a lot of people hunt. A lot of people export corns. That was taught from the Native Americans. And then the colonists and explorers, which is the Europeans, they brought a lot of diseases with them when they came to America. And the Native Americans did contract a lot of these diseases, including measles, smallpox, yellow fever, and many more devastating diseases. And of course, their immune system wasn't strong enough to fight these diseases off. So a lot of these Native Americans did die in result of these diseases. Um, but in time, while these Europeans were here, they started being greedy. They disregarded all respect and value of the land that the Native Americans had, and they started displaying some greed and arrogance. And so, in the 19th century, the government's the government's solution to this problem, Indian problem, was to force them to lands, to specific parts of lands called, of course, we know, reservations. And it says that during 1830s, over 125,000 Indians from different tribes were forced from their homes in many different states to a reservation in Oklahoma. And this move was traumatic for the Indians, for the Indian family. In many cases, it disrupted their culture, traditions. Again, this is to civilize the Indians according to the U.S. government. So they decided to force them out to different parts of the land, and a lot of times these reservations were the land were very poor. Some of the tribe they fought to keep up from giving away their land that they traditionally owned, because the reservation, as I say, was very poor quality. And because of this, a lot of them that actually moved to the reservation, they had to depend on the government for food and a lot of different resources because they didn't have it on their reservation. Um, Next, I'm going to talk about the laws and the acts. There were many different laws and acts that was passed by the U.S. government during the time that they came over to America. I'm going to name a few. We talk about the Indian Removal Act in 1830. On April 7, President Andrew Jackson submitted a bill to Congress calling for the removal of tribes in the east to lands west of the Mississippi. On May 28th, the Indian Removal Act was passed, and from 1830 to 1840, thousands of Native Americans were forcibly removed. And again, this is when they started removing the Native Americans from their land and just shipping them off to the reservation because they wanted their land. Their land was rich with soil, and a lot of these Europeans they thought that the Native Americans didn't know how to control their land. They didn't know how to use the land and all the resources that were there. The next treaty we're going to talk about is the Treaty of New Echota in 1835. A portion of the Cherokee Nation agreed to give up Cherokee lands in the southeast in exchange for land and removal to Indian Territory. So a lot of these Indians, the Cherokee tribe, they decided to give up a portion of their land in exchange for land and removal to Indian Territory. So they wanted to be, they were told that if they gave up some land, then it was going to be moved to Indian Territory. But of course, that wasn't the problem. The U.S. government did promise a lot of treaties. They promised a lot of different things to these Native Americans, and a lot of them never saw anything. And next, we have the Indian Appropriation Act in 1871. This congressional act specified that no tribe thereafter would be recognized as an independent nation with which the federal government could make a treaty. Of course, they tried everything in their power to rob these Native Americans. And the last one I'm going to talk about is the Mining Act of 1872. Passed by the U.S. Congress, Alaskan Natives were excluded from claiming ownership to their own land. So as you can see, we think about there were many different laws and acts that was passed and treaties. But as you can see, these Native Americans had no type of say-so in what they had. They just came and they were just robbed of their lands, and it was taken from them. The next thing I'm going to talk about are the wars. The Europeans soon pursued their intent to conquer this new continent with brutal attacks and invasions. And when we talk about that, there were many wars that went on between the Americans, or we call them the Europeans, and then the Native Americans. And I'm just going to list a few. We talk about the Indian Wars, the Seminole War, which is that Seminole tribe against the Europeans, and the most famous, Wounded Knee, South Dakota of 1890. And this is one of the worst massacre ever, where warriors, women, and children alike were forcibly slaughtered by the U.S. cavalry. And at the end of this presentation, or my section, you'll see a video that kind of go more into details about this war and the tales of trails. And then we have another breakdown of the Wounded Knee. There were 120 men and 230 women and children from the Native Americans, and they were stripped of everything, their weapons. They were stripped of everything they had, and the next day 487 U.S. soldiers just started firing, just open firing all of them, and at the end they buried 250 Sioux, which is that tribe, the Sioux tribe, and they just threw them in graves and buried them. And in result of this, there were 20 congressional medals of honor that were awarded to the soldiers that actually opened fire on these Native Americans. I find that to be very harsh and brutal. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the Trails of Tears. Okay, despite the Supreme Court's ruling in 1831 and in 1832 that the Cherokee had a right to stay on their land, President Jackson sent federal troops to forcibly remove almost 16,000 Cherokee who had refused to move westward under the unrecognized Treaty of New Echota, 1835, and had remained in Georgia. So here we can see after they passed all these treaty and laws, they still didn't uphold their end of the bargain, which is, and when I say they, I'm talking about the Europeans. They still did not uphold their end of the bargain. They still wanted to force these Native Americans off their land, even after they promised them that they could stay on a certain part of the land if they, in return, trade certain part of the lands, and again, they didn't uphold anything. So these Native Americans were stripped of everything they had, and not only their land, they were stripped of just their languages, their customs, their culture. They were stripped of everything by these Europeans. Um, they were not only the Native American people. They were not only reduced in numbers, but they were taken from their homes. And again, I say they were stripped of their customs, and even they were forbidden to speak their native language. So think about it: if you go to another country or you're used to speaking another language, and somebody tell you that you're not allowed to speak your language, that was kind of hurtful for the Native Americans. Their children were also taken from them and sent to schools to civilize them, quote unquote. Um, and they were taken for about 8 years, and they were sent them back. And as they were in boarding school, they weren't allowed to speak their native language. If they actually speak their native language, they got in trouble. Um, they were forced to Many Indian children, they were forced to be educated in English speaking boarding schools, and the children were also removed from their homes and placed with non-Indian families until the Indian Child Welfare Act of 1978. And this actually like messed up the Native American culture, because a lot of times when these Indian children came back, they didn't remember their parents. They didn't remember their mom and dad. Of course, they didn't know how to speak the Native American language. They didn't know how to speak their tribal language. So when they came back home, it was hard for them to adapt back to their family. And this was done by, again, the Europeans that sent them away. Um, at the children were taken, again, like I said, and then forced to abandon every aspect of their heritage. So right now, as we can see, I think it's about, let me see, not not a lot of excuse me, not a lot of Native American languages still spoken today. Out of about 120 something right now, it's probably about 40 something, or I think the book says 20, 25 or so, that people still speak today, because they were all abandoned, so they weren't allowed to speak their language. And right now, that's the end of my section. So to conclude this section, I'm gonna actually leave you with a short video. It's about 10 minutes or so, and it go more into details about the Wounded Knee of South Dakota, and the Trail of Tears. Oh my gosh, Trail of Tears. And I hope you guys enjoyed the video. And after that video, then we'll go right into the next section. Thank you.